Under the desk, all of you, quickly! Please get under the desks!
No! Workplace tragedies reveal the devastating cost of negligence, human error, and inadequate safety measures.
As the gas cloud condenses, it sinks to ground level.
From fires to collapses and explosions, these incidents not only claimed lives.
More than 1,100 people died in the Rana Plaza disaster in Dhaka. The factory had been illegally constructed,
But also left lasting scars on industries and communities. They serve as grim reminders of the importance of prioritizing worker safety and the need for accountability.
1 minute 15 seconds, velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9 nautical miles, downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
In this list, we explore the most disturbing workplace deaths in history, each a sobering lesson in the price of oversight. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire, 1911. On March 25, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City became the site of one of the deadliest industrial disasters in American history, claiming the lives of 146 workers. Most of the victims were young immigrant women who were trapped inside the building due to locked doors and inadequate safety measures.
The women working at the machines tried to get out of the exits, could not move the doors, and
The tragedy exposed the appalling working conditions of the time and sparked significant workplace safety reforms. The factory was located on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of a Manhattan building, producing women's garments. On the day of the fire, the workers were densely packed into overcrowded spaces filled with flammable materials, such as fabric and sewing machines. When a fire broke out on the 8th floor, it quickly spread due to the highly combustible environment. Workers were left with few options for escape, as the factory's owners had locked the doors to prevent theft and unauthorized breaks, a common practice at the time. Panic ensued as workers rushed to the limited exits. Many were unable to reach the fire escape, which collapsed under the weight of those fleeing, while others were trapped by flames blocking the stairwells. Some resorted to jumping from windows, only to fall to their deaths. Firefighters arrived, but were unable to reach the upper floors with their ladders, leaving many workers with no chance of survival. The aftermath of the fire was devastating, but it catalyzed sweeping changes in workplace safety laws. Public outrage mounted as the horrific details emerged, and the owners of the factory faced trials but were ultimately acquitted of criminal charges. However, the tragedy led to the establishment of the Factory Investigating Commission, which pushed for new legislation requiring improved building safety standards, fire alarms, sprinklers, and unlocked exits during working hours. The Boal Gas Tragedy, 1984.
These are chemicals that stay in the environment for hundreds of years, and they cause extensive damage to lungs, kidney, brain, cancers, birth defects.
The Boal Gas Tragedy, often referred to as the world's worst industrial disaster, occurred on the night of December 2nd to 3rd, 1984, when a catastrophic gas leak at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, released methyl isocyanate, MIC, into the air. The toxic cloud spread over nearby neighborhoods, killing thousands of residents almost instantly and leaving tens of thousands more with severe health issues. The leak was caused by a combination of mechanical failure and poor safety practices. A tank containing MIC, a highly toxic chemical used in pesticide production, became overheated due to water entering the tank. This triggered a violent chemical reaction, causing the release of over 40 tons of MIC gas. Despite the plant's history of safety concerns, critical safety systems, such as refrigeration and flare towers, were either inoperative or turned off to cut costs. The immediate impact was horrific. Residents living near the plant awoke to burning eyes, difficulty breathing, and nausea as the gas spread through their neighborhoods. By morning, thousands had died from exposure, and hospitals were overwhelmed with patients suffering from respiratory failure, blindness, and other injuries. Over 15,000 people eventually lost their lives, and an estimated 500,000 more suffered long-term health effects, including cancer, neurological disorders, and birth defects. The disaster also caused extensive environmental damage. The plant site remains contaminated with toxic waste, affecting water supplies and soil in the region. Efforts to clean up the site have been slow, leaving a legacy of pollution that continues to harm local communities. The Chernobyl Disaster, 1986.
Been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union at the
Chernobyl reactor 4, the scene of the total meltdown.
That explosion at a nuclear plant in the Soviet Union.
On April 26, 1986, the world witnessed one of the most catastrophic nuclear disasters in history, when Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, exploded during a late-night safety test. The explosion caused immediate worker fatalities, widespread radiation exposure, and long-term global implications for nuclear safety. The accident occurred due to a flawed reactor design and critical operator errors during the test. In an attempt to simulate a power outage, technicians disabled key safety systems, including the automatic shutdown mechanism. This led to a rapid and uncontrollable increase in reactor power, causing two massive explosions. The blasts instantly killed 2 workers and exposed many others to lethal radiation levels. In the hours following the explosion, emergency responders rushed to the site without adequate protective gear, unaware of the intensity of the radiation. Over the next few days, 29 firefighters and plant workers succumbed to acute radiation syndrome, ARS, characterized by severe burns, vomiting, and organ failure. The incident forced the evacuation of over 100,000 people from surrounding areas, leaving behind a ghost town in Pripyat. The long-term impacts of the disaster were equally devastating. Thousands of cases of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer, were linked to radiation exposure, affecting not just the immediate area, but also regions across Europe where radioactive fallout spread. The environmental consequences included contamination of vast stretches of land, rendering them uninhabitable for decades. Chernobyl also had profound global ramifications for nuclear safety. It exposed the dangers of inadequate oversight and poor communication in high-stakes industries. The Soviet Union's initial attempts to downplay the incident led to international criticism and calls for transparency in nuclear operations. In response, the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, implemented stricter safety protocols, including improved reactor designs and mandatory emergency preparedness plans. The Deepwater Horizon explosion, 2010. On April 20, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon offshore drilling rig, operated by BP, exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 workers and setting off one of the largest environmental disasters in history. The incident exposed glaring negligence and technical failures that have since become a case study in corporate irresponsibility. The explosion occurred during the final stages of drilling an exploratory well called Macondo. A series of safety lapses, including a failure to properly manage well pressure, led to a blowout, a sudden release of oil and gas. This was exacerbated by the malfunction of the blowout preventer, a critical safety device designed to seal the well in case of emergencies. The resulting explosion engulfed the rig in flames, forcing the evacuation of workers. 11 crew members lost their lives, and others were left with injuries and severe trauma. Following the explosion, the rig sank, rupturing the well and releasing millions of barrels of oil into the Gulf over the next 87 days. The spill devastated marine ecosystems, killing countless fish, birds, and other wildlife. Coastal communities dependent on fishing and tourism suffered significant economic losses, further amplifying the disaster's human toll. Investigations revealed a culture of negligence and cost-cutting at BP. Reports found that warning signs, such as unusual pressure readings, had been ignored in the hours leading up to the explosion. BP and its contractors, Transocean and Halliburton, were criticized for prioritizing speed and profit over safety. The collapse of Rana Plaza, 2013. On April 24, 2013, the Rana Plaza building in Savar, Bangladesh, collapsed, killing over 1,100 garment workers and injuring thousands more. This catastrophic event exposed the dangerous working conditions in the global garment industry and sparked widespread calls for reform. Rana Plaza housed multiple garment factories producing clothing for international brands. The building, originally intended for residential use, had been illegally modified to include additional floors and accommodate heavy machinery. The day before the collapse, workers reported visible cracks in the walls. Despite warnings from engineers to evacuate the building, factory owners ordered employees to return to work, fearing financial losses from production delays. The building gave way under the strain, trapping thousands of workers under rubble. The disaster highlighted systemic issues in Bangladesh's garment sector, including corruption, poor enforcement of building codes, and exploitative labor practices. Many of the victims were young women earning low wages in unsafe conditions to meet the demands of fast fashion, a business model characterized by rapid production cycles and cost-cutting. The global response was swift. Outrage over the tragedy prompted activists, consumers, and governments to demand better protections for workers. The Bangladesh Accord on Fire and Building Safety, a legally binding agreement between international brands and local suppliers, was established to improve factory inspections and ensure compliance with safety standards. Additionally, organizations such as the International Labor Organization, ILO, launched initiatives to support victims and strengthen labor rights. Despite these efforts, challenges persist. Critics argue that many brands have not done enough to address systemic exploitation in their supply chains. However, the Rana Plaza tragedy remains a turning point, bringing much-needed attention to the human cost of fast fashion.
1,100 people died in the Rana Plaza disaster in Dhaka. The factory had been illegally constructed.
The Texas City Refinery explosion, 2005, on March 23, 2005, a devastating explosion rocked BP's Texas City Refinery, killing 15 workers and injuring more than 170 others. This preventable tragedy exposed severe safety lapses
during a series of explosions at the BP refinery in Texas City, Texas,
and became a landmark case for industrial reform. The explosion occurred during the restarting of an isomerization unit used to increase octane levels in gasoline. Due to a series of procedural failures, the unit became overfilled with highly flammable hydrocarbons. When the material ignited, it triggered a massive blast, causing a fireball that engulfed nearby trailers where contractors were stationed. Many of the fatalities were workers in these trailers, which were placed dangerously close to hazardous equipment. Investigations revealed a troubling pattern of negligence. BP had been warned about safety risks at the refinery in the years leading up to the explosion. Internal audits and reports highlighted issues such as outdated equipment, insufficient training, and a lack of investment in maintenance. Despite these warnings, cost-cutting measures were prioritized over safety improvements. The refinery's safety culture was described as reactive rather than proactive, focusing on compliance rather than preventing accidents. The aftermath of the explosion was significant. BP faced $1.5 billion in fines, lawsuits, and settlements. The U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, CSB, released a comprehensive report criticizing BP's systemic failures and calling for industry-wide changes. The disaster also prompted the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, to increase scrutiny of refinery operations, leading to stricter safety regulations and more rigorous inspections. The Challenger Disaster, 1986. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart just 73 seconds after liftoff.
Velocity 2,900 feet per second, altitude 9 nautical miles, downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
Killing all 7 crew members, including Krista McAuliffe, a teacher selected to join the mission as part of NASA's Teacher in Space program. The disaster remains a tragic reminder of the catastrophic consequences of engineering flaws and managerial misjudgments. The Challenger mission aimed to inspire a new generation of students and demonstrate NASA's technological prowess. However, the launch occurred under unusually cold weather conditions.
It was a bitter cold but sparkling clear morning at Cape Canaveral. Here, the last seconds of the countdown.
3, 2,
1.
With temperatures far below the tested limits of the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company responsible for the boosters, had expressed concerns about the performance of the O-rings, rubber seals designed to prevent hot gases from escaping the booster joints. Cold temperatures compromised the elasticity of the O-rings, increasing the risk of failure. Despite these warnings, NASA management decided to proceed with the launch, facing pressure to meet deadlines and maintain public enthusiasm for the space program. Just over a minute into the flight, the compromised O-rings failed, allowing hot gases to escape and ignite the external fuel tank. The resulting explosion caused the shuttle to disintegrate, leading to the loss of all lives on board. The disaster prompted an extensive investigation by the Rogers Commission, which found systemic flaws in NASA's decision-making process. The report criticized the agency for prioritizing schedules and public image over safety and failing to heed engineers' warnings. The commission also highlighted communication breakdowns within NASA that prevented critical information from reaching key decision-makers. In the aftermath, NASA implemented sweeping changes to its safety protocols and organizational culture. These included stricter risk assessments, improved communication channels, and a redesign of the solid rocket boosters to eliminate vulnerabilities. The tragedy also reshaped public perceptions of space exploration, emphasizing its inherent risks. The Boston Molasses Disaster, 1919. On January 15, 1919, an enormous tank of molasses burst in Boston's North End, releasing a 25-foot-high wave of the sticky substance that swept through the streets at 35 miles per hour. The bizarre yet horrifying disaster killed 21 people and injured over 150, leaving a grim legacy in industrial safety. The tank, owned by the Purity Distilling Company, was used to store molasses for alcohol production. At the time, molasses was a common ingredient in industrial alcohol, particularly during Prohibition. Despite the tank's massive size, it held 2.3 million gallons. It had been poorly constructed with visible leaks ignored by the company. Workers and local residents often saw molasses seeping from the tank, but were reassured by the company that it posed no risk. On the day of the disaster, a sudden structural failure caused the tank to rupture, releasing a torrent of molasses that flattened buildings, overturned vehicles, and swept people and animals into its path. Many victims drowned or suffocated in the thick syrup, while others were crushed by debris. Rescuers struggled to wade through the molasses, hampering recovery efforts and prolonging the suffering of those trapped. The incident shocked the nation and led to one of the first major class action lawsuits in U.S. history. Investigations revealed that the tank had been hastily constructed without proper engineering oversight or safety testing. Purity Distilling was found liable for negligence, and the company paid out significant damages to victims and their families. The Boston Molasses Disaster became a catalyst for improved industrial safety regulations. It underscored the need for rigorous construction standards, regular inspections, and accountability in industrial operations. The tragedy also demonstrated how corporate negligence could have catastrophic consequences, influencing future legal and safety frameworks. The Pemberton Mill Collapse, 1860. On January 10, 1860, the Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, collapsed suddenly, trapping hundreds of workers under its rubble. This catastrophic industrial disaster killed over 145 people and injured at least 166 more. It remains a stark example of the deadly consequences of poor construction and industrial greed. The Pemberton Mill, built in 1853, was a sprawling textile factory designed to house heavy machinery and hundreds of workers. However, cost-cutting during its construction led to critical flaws in the building's structure. To maximize profit, substandard materials were used, and the building's design included thin iron support beams, incapable of bearing the weight of the equipment and floors. 7 years later, the factory was filled beyond its intended capacity with additional machinery, further straining its weak structure. At approximately 5 p.m., the mill's walls and floors gave way with a deafening crash, burying hundreds of workers beneath the rubble. Many were young women and children, employed in the hazardous and poorly regulated textile industry. Rescue efforts stretched into the night, but tragedy struck again when oil lanterns and gas lines ignited a fire, engulfing the ruins in flames. Those trapped were either burned alive or suffocated by smoke, leaving few survivors. Investigations revealed that the collapse was entirely preventable. The use of inferior materials and the failure to adhere to safety standards directly contributed to the disaster. The mill's owners faced public outrage, but they largely escaped accountability, highlighting the lack of legal protections for workers at the time. The Pemberton mill collapse spurred calls for improved workplace safety and building regulations. Although it would take decades for significant reforms to materialize, the tragedy became a rallying point for labor rights advocates, emphasizing the need to prioritize worker safety over profit. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, 2011. On March 11, 2011, a powerful earthquake and tsunami struck Japan, triggering a catastrophic meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This disaster caused significant worker casualties and widespread environmental damage, with consequences that continue to affect the region and the global conversation on nuclear safety. The tsunami, with waves over 40 feet high, overwhelmed the plant's seawalls and flooded its backup generators, leaving the reactors without power to cool their cores. The resulting overheating caused hydrogen explosions in 3 reactors, releasing radioactive material into the environment. Plant workers, known as the Fukushima 50, risked their lives to stabilize the reactors and prevent further devastation. Despite their heroic efforts, several workers died, while many others were exposed to dangerously high radiation levels. The disaster forced the evacuation of over 150,000 residents, many of whom were unable to return due to persistent radiation contamination. Entire towns were abandoned, and the region's agriculture and fisheries suffered devastating economic losses. Cleanup efforts are ongoing, with an estimated timeline of decades to safely decommission the plant and manage radioactive waste. Investigations into the disaster revealed critical failings by the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, and regulatory bodies. TEPCO had been warned about the vulnerability of its seawalls and emergency systems to tsunamis, but failed to take action. The lack of stringent regulatory oversight allowed these deficiencies to persist, ultimately contributing to the severity of the crisis. Globally, the Fukushima disaster reignited debates about the safety of nuclear energy. Several countries, including Germany, accelerated plans to phase out nuclear power, while others implemented stricter safety protocols for their facilities. The disaster also highlighted the need for robust disaster preparedness plans, particularly in areas prone to natural calamities. The Imperial Sugar Refinery explosion, 2008. On February 7, 2008, a devastating explosion tore through the Imperial Sugar Refinery in Port Wentworth, Georgia, killing 14 workers and injuring dozens more. The disaster, caused by combustible sugar dust, revealed the hidden dangers of dust accumulation in industrial facilities and underscored the urgent need for stricter safety regulations. The explosion occurred in the packaging area of the refinery, where fine particles of sugar dust had accumulated over time. When the dust became airborne and encountered an ignition source, it triggered a chain reaction of secondary explosions. These secondary blasts caused catastrophic structural damage, trapping workers under rubble and engulfing parts of the facility in flames. The fire burned for several days, complicating rescue and recovery efforts. Investigations revealed that the explosion was entirely preventable. Combustible dust created during the sugar refinement process had been allowed to build up on surfaces and in the air due to inadequate ventilation and housekeeping practices. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, later cited Imperial Sugar for numerous safety violations, including the lack of proper dust control measures and fire suppression systems. The tragedy highlighted a widespread but often overlooked industrial hazard. Dust from materials such as sugar, flour, coal, and metal can be highly explosive under the right conditions, yet many facilities fail to recognize the risks. Following the Imperial Sugar explosion, OSHA launched a national campaign to raise awareness about combustible dust hazards and enforce stricter compliance with safety standards. The Canary Wharf Crane Collapse, 2000. On May 21, 2000, a towering crane collapsed at a construction site in London's Canary Wharf, killing 3 workers and injuring several others. The high-profile incident underscored the inherent risks of large-scale construction projects and prompted reforms to improve site safety. The crane, used to assemble the steel framework of a skyscraper, had been in operation when a structural failure caused it to collapse onto the construction site below. The workers stationed on and near the crane were unable to escape in time, resulting in their tragic deaths. The incident not only halted the project but also drew widespread media attention, given Canary Wharf's status as a symbol of modern urban development. Investigators identified several contributing factors to the collapse, including improper assembly and maintenance of the crane. The crane's support structure was found to have been compromised, raising questions about whether proper safety checks had been conducted before it was put into use. Additionally, the site's safety protocols and emergency preparedness plans were criticized for being insufficient to prevent or mitigate the disaster. The tragedy highlighted the risks associated with cranes, which are among the most dangerous equipment used in construction. Following the incident, the UK's Health and Safety Executive, HSE, issued stricter guidelines for crane safety, including mandatory inspections, operator training, and improved risk assessments. Construction companies were required to adopt more rigorous protocols to ensure the structural integrity of cranes and protect workers on site. The Hartford Circus Fire, 1944. On July 6, 1944, a tragic fire engulfed a crowded circus tent during a performance by the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus in Hartford, Connecticut. Known as the Day the Clowns Cried, the blaze claimed the lives of 167 people, including workers, performers, and spectators, and injured over 700 more. The incident exposed critical shortcomings in fire safety practices and regulations. The fire broke out during a matinee show attended by thousands, including many children. The circus tent, which had been waterproofed with a mixture of paraffin wax and gasoline, ignited rapidly when a small flame, possibly from a cigarette or electrical fault, touched the canvas. The flames spread with shocking speed, and within minutes, the entire tent was ablaze. Chaos ensued as the crowd rushed to escape through limited exits. Many were trampled in the panic, while others were trapped by collapsing poles and flaming debris. Several performers and workers acted heroically, helping attendees to safety, but some perished in the process. The poorly trained and equipped circus staff struggled to control the fire or manage the evacuation effectively. Investigations revealed numerous fire safety violations. The tent's flammable waterproofing, the absence of fire extinguishers, and the lack of an effective evacuation plan all contributed to the high death toll. Additionally, the circus company had failed to secure the required fire permits for the performance. The aftermath of the fire brought widespread public outrage and led to legal action against Ringling Brothers' executives, who were found guilty of negligence. The incident also prompted significant changes in fire safety regulations for public events. New laws mandated fireproof materials for tents, regular fire inspections, and clearly marked accessible exits. The Aberfan Disaster, 1966.
The coal tip at Aberfan near Merthyr Tydfil slid forward, engulfing an infant school and a row of houses.
On October 21, 1966, a coal waste tip towering above the Welsh mining village of Aberfan collapsed, sending thousands of tons of slurry down the hillside. The landslide engulfed a school and nearby homes, killing 144 people, including 116 children and 28 adults. The disaster was a direct result of negligence by the National Coal Board, NCB, and remains one of the most harrowing workplace-related tragedies. The coal tip, an unstable mound of mining waste, had been poorly maintained and positioned on a natural spring. Heavy rainfall in the days leading up to the collapse caused the tip to become